the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site, covering the Arizona Cardinals. This edition, this is episode 405, and it is the first of two Combine review shows. So instead of putting together what it'll assuredly end up a 2-hour show if we did it all together, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, is on with me as he normally is. But as we've done, I think this is 3 years running, and not even the first time this year. Justin Higdon from the original Draft Breakdown podcast, Seth's co-host on that podcast over here, there, joins us again to talk the draft, the combine, and so this you get basically, if you haven't subscribed to that podcast, original Draft Breakdown podcast, you get, like, one, you should, two, you get a bonus episode on the Rise Up See Red podcast, because here I am and basically gonna try to drive just a little bit as Seth and Justin give us all sorts of good insight about the combine prospects and stuff like that. So Justin, welcome to the show. How you been?
Great. I always love this. This is my favorite time of the year. We get, like, every year after the combine now, we do like 5 shows. So I love speaking about all of these players because there are so many great performers every year. So it's always exciting.
And Seth and Justin, I believe they recorded their post-combine show Monday night, and it did it already drop? And So their show has already dropped. This show will drop Wednesday. As in this edition of the show, this is our offensive prospect combine review. We will cover each position group: quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, and offensive line. The risers and fallers, stock up, stock down, and of course, for this show, we have to look at it from an Arizona Cardinals centric set of lenses. And so let's go ahead and get started. Everyone, like, the Cardinals aren't drafting a quarterback, but the quarterback competition, the quarterback play at the combine, the performance there were 2 names that came up especially, and one in particular. Bryce Young, the number 1 prospect in terms of quarterback, did not participate, and so everyone is sort of losing sight of him. But C.J. Stroud, Ohio State, and then Florida's Anthony Richardson. Oh my gosh. Let's talk about it. Have you ever seen a quarterback have his stock rise more than Richardson did in this combine?
No, we really haven't. And it's interesting because, when you go to athletic comparisons for Anthony Richardson and the quarterback position, there really are none. I mean, we've seen, and Justin and I will talk about it, like, we've seen, like, Cam Newton thrown out, Andrew Luck's one that's come up a couple times, even like a Dante Culpepper. But realistically, those guys still aren't as athletic as what Richardson was. You have to go to a different position to, like, find similar athletes to what we saw from Anthony Richardson, and it's crazy to see, man. It's like you're looking at guys like Leonard Floyd, the edge rusher, who was a top, like a top 10
How
pick.
How does he comp to Cam Newton?
He's a little smaller because Newton was what, two?
It was like 6'5", 250, 260.
Yeah, let's see. When he came out, he was 6'5".
He's a little faster than Cam Newton too.
Yeah, and he was a lot. I mean, it's relative when you're getting to this fastness. Cam was a 4.56, but Anthony ran a 4.43, and again,
which is that's close to Justin Fields, but again, now he's about 20 pounds heavier than Fields.
Right. But the other thing was, we've never seen jumps like that from a quarterback ever.
Now, my question is, how much does that matter? The jumps, how much does that matter?
It doesn't.
It's impressive. Right? It's impressive, but
we would rather see like the shuttle times. Those would be more predictive, and he didn't run those. So yeah, like you said, Jess, like it's really impressive. But I'll throw a name out there because athletically and size-wise, I think a good comp for him, as close as you can get, is Vince Young. But certainly you did not have the level of success as a collegiate quarterback for Anthony Richardson as you had for Vince Young. Vince Young was in a national championship game, and Vince Young was a Heisman contender, and Anthony Richardson was not any of that. So it's almost like if Vince Young would have come out after his freshman year.
Yeah, and it's hard to compare because if you go to NFL.com, they've actually done a really nice job, or the combine results site. I don't really know how to explain to get there, but the combine results area, if you go there, they now actually provide like not just like a grade, but in the score breakdown by Next Gen Stats, they have a production score. And so, like, if you put Anthony Richardson's stuff in there, that's where the contrast comes in versus every other, like, elite athlete. And again, there's never been a quarterback that tested like this. So I think that's the first thing we need to understand. But when you look at his production score, he was the 11th quarterback production-wise in this class. So you're taking a unicorn athlete and hoping that production comes up to that level. Whereas, guys that we're talking about, Andrew Luck, Cam Newton, Vince Young, all of these guys,
they were very established quarterbacks in college.
Correct. So,
well, like Cam Newton carried a team to a national championship. He wasn't a great college passer, but he really took a team on his back and took him to a national championship. Luck, I don't think anybody had questions about his passing. Richardson, look, he's got a rocket arm, but if you watched a combine workout, they're throwing against air, and he's still throwing, his deep balls, his downfield balls are kind of flat. And when you contrast him with somebody like Stroud, who was throwing really pretty passes, and even Levis was throwing more accurate deep balls, you kind of see where that accuracy is. A lot of people say, I told Seth this on our show earlier this week. People will say like Richardson's accuracy is mechanical, and mechanics can be fixed. I think they can be. But
how often do they get fixed between college and the pros?
That's the question. Yep.
Well, and that's the biggest thing here is, we talked about it a little bit, and it would be obviously not ideal for us, Jess, as Cardinals fans, but a situation like where Seattle just re-signed Geno Smith,
mm-hmm.
And then Richardson can go sit for 1 or 2 years while he actually has time to work on those things. The problem becomes this, and Justin pointed it out, that's probably not going to work because you have the fact that, Pete Carroll's, I think, close to 80 now. He and Justin.
No. I think Justin 72 though. And it's like
he and Justin went to high school together, so they known each other for a long time. But my point was, do you want? Does Pete Carroll and John Schneider have kind of been like in lockstep all this time they've worked together? Pete Carroll's in the sunset of his career. Do you spend that high first round pick if you're Seattle on a project? I don't even want to say project, but a quarterback of the future. If you're Pete Carroll,
Are you going along with that, or do you want a guy that's going to help now with Geno Smith, who just set the Seahawks record for yards in a season, I think passing touchdowns this season? Like, get a guy that can help you now, get to the playoffs, and try and get solidify your legacy. Pete Carroll's not here to develop young quarterbacks.
No, now the question that becomes for this is, obviously we know that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are the two quarterbacks that ultimately are 95% certain going to get picked with the first two picks of the draft.
Don't discount Levis to Indy.
So the question is this, and I'll pose it we'll do it with Levis. How likely do you think it is that Richardson and or Will Levis become top 5 targets? Because as things go right now for the Cardinals, sitting tight at number 3 makes sense still, because if there's 2 quarterbacks going, then it makes sense to stay where you're at to get the top prospect. But if you've got 2 other teams that want to come up and get a quarterback, even though, to me, the Will Anderson selection seems like you shouldn't think about that, just do it. Will there be a trade market because there's going to be 3 or maybe 4 quarterbacks that people are going to want to go up to number 3 and get?
Yeah, I think there definitely will be, because I'll tell you this, and Seth and I talked about this on our show. Indianapolis is at 4 and Houston is at 2, and they're in the same division. If they are keen on the same quarterback, or they think they might be keen on the same quarterback, Indianapolis has to get in front of Houston. So that means either Houston has to trade up to 1 from 2 to avoid Indianapolis beating them to the punch, or vice versa. Indianapolis, their GM is Chris Ballard. He is Lance Zierlein is a friend of his, a guy who considers Chris Ballard his mentor. He said, or at least alluded to strongly, that Indianapolis is not going to take Bryce Young. Okay. That is not the type of quarterback that Chris Ballard values as a GM. So that would insinuate that Ballard would probably value maybe CJ Stroud, maybe Levis, maybe even Richardson. If Indy trades up to number 1, they're not going to take Bryce Young.
That's crazy.
They're going to take Levis or maybe Stroud. Now, don't rule out Stroud for Houston either, or Levis, but don't rule out Stroud. I've heard people rule out Stroud because he has the same agent as Deshaun Watson. But their longtime beat reporter, John McClain, he said they're not concerned about who the agent is. Even though Stroud and Deshaun Watson have the same agent, Houston is not concerned with who the agent is. They'll work with David Mulligetta, even despite the Deshaun Watson thing. They know it's all business, and he's one of the most highly regarded agents in the business. So Houston might take Stroud, and then you might have Bryce Young still sitting there at 3. If any one of those 3 guys, and maybe even Richardson, is sitting there at 3, the Cardinals are in primo position to trade back. So I absolutely think it's on the table for them to trade back. And as Seth has pointed out, with a new GM, he's looking to make a splash, and he can't miss this pick. So yeah, it seems like Will Anderson is a can't miss, but also you can also buy yourself time by trading back and getting a collection of picks. If somebody else is coming up to look for a quarterback, you can definitely buy yourself time doing that.
Now, obviously, other quarterbacks. Were there any other quarterbacks of note that saw their stock rise? We were talking before the show how Bryce Young's stock fell, but not because of anything he did, simply because he didn't do anything on the combine. And so CJ Stroud's his laser throws were on display. Anthony Richardson's athleticism was on display. Will Levis's cannon was on display. When Bryce Young is, if you look across the quarterback prospects, is head and shoulders above these guys in terms of quarterback play and ability and everything that you would want to see in a quarterback. Did his stock actually drop, or are we just amazed when we see the on-field drills and things will go back to the normal after the pro day?
I think there's going to be a couple concerns, obviously, and we've talked about him before. The fact that he's small at he came in about Kyler's height, but he's thin. He came in at 204, but he didn't test. And the reason he didn't test is because he doesn't weigh 204. Like,
the 204 is fake for him.
Right. Like, he drank beer and ate cheeseburgers for 3 weeks to make sure that he put on enough weight to be over the 200 pounds. So I think the thing with him is going to be, you have a historically small, lean quarterback. Guys like our buddy Sully, Jinx, Billy M on Twitter, they've kind of talked about this. It's not the style, it's not the size, it's not all, it's not any one thing. It's the combination of the fact that you have a smaller, slight quarterback. He doesn't have the arm that Kyler does. He's closer to Baker arm talent wise, wouldn't you say, Justin?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've pointed to is since 2000, you've had 3 quarterbacks that are 6'1" and under, and 210 pounds and under go in the first round. Okay, so I'm expanding greatly on his build, which is 5'10", 204. Again, I'll repeat that: 6'1" and under, 210 and under. 3 quarterbacks went in the first round. That was Michael Vick, Kyler Murray, Johnny Manziel. And I don't think anyone would argue that Bryce Young is not the running threat that those 3 guys were. He's also not as tall as Manziel or Vick. He's not as thickly built as any of those 3 guys. So he's very unique. And he certainly doesn't have the arm strength that at least that Vic and Kyler had. So he's very unique. Like, he's a magician on the field. There's no doubt. Like, he's very skilled. He's got great pocket awareness. But how much, can he run? Yeah, I think he can. He showed that this year. And he probably would time, if he's at his playing weight, he's probably going to time around 4.6 in the 40, but that's just not the threat that he is. And I just think he's a very unique outlier.
A couple quarterbacks I think that could interest the Cardinals, that you would look at on day 3, obviously, at this stage of things. And it's funny because a lot of them profile similarly to each other, so it makes it easy. Clayton Tune, the Houston quarterback, who had actually an excellent workout, but when Anthony Richardson is doing unhuman things, coming in second, being the second most athletic overall quarterback from the group, doesn't really do anything. But he came in at 6'2.5", 220, and Justin and I were talking about it a little bit earlier. The one thing we didn't get from Richardson that would have kind of pushed his athleticism over the top is that 3-cone and short shuttle, right? That short area movement. Tune did test that, and he did really well, not just from the quarterback perspective, but like all the athletes. And so he was the best quarterback in the 3-cone. He was second to Stetson Bennett, who's, obviously we've all seen him from an athletic standpoint. So you look at it, he had, from a 3-cone standpoint, he was, just behind guys like Jalen Jones, the cornerback from Texas A&M, and wide receivers. Like, he's running similar to that. So that'll more show you pocket mobility and ability to move. He actually measured and tested out really similar to like a Marcus Mariota, who, you and I talked about off the air. a potential fit for the Cardinals this offseason. So if you're looking in day 3, and then,
Tune's probably pretty favorably comparable to like Colt McCoy, right?
Yeah, he's a little thicker at
little
220,
bigger.
but yeah, exactly. And I think the guy that's more in the McCoy range, but he didn't test poorly, was Jake Haener, right?
Yeah.
He didn't run the 40, but he did jump and run the 3-cone.
Yeah, his 3-cone was really good.
And so, you look at it, he's 6 foot 207. So again, a day 3 guy, but just kind of guys to look at.
He towers over Kyler,
Yeah, I know, right? What is your opinion on the Shepherd kid, Justin?
I mean, I'm going to be charitable here. I think he's got some skill. I mean, obviously he set all the records for D2, and I think in fact he finished his career as the all-division college football leader in yards and maybe even in passing touchdowns. But they got a lot of mileage both on Senior Bowl coverage and combine coverage by interviewing his father, who is a world champion arm wrestler. So there's something about that. I mean, Tyson Bagent is the guy's name. He's 6'3", 213. His size is fine. His athletic testing was very good. But he's jumping 2 divisions, right? He's going from Division 2, not FCS, not FBS, and definitely not Power 5. So there's a huge learning curve here. I've heard mixed reviews from people who saw him throw at the Senior Bowl. To me, a guy like that is a late round player, undrafted free agent tops. And but I fully admit that I have not watched any Shepherd football games this year. But it's just, he's a player who typically, right, Seth, if a guy is catching fire in these lower divisions, you hear about him before he gets that All-Star game invite.
Correct.
And so I have a bit of skepticism about this guy. His dad's certainly a dynamic TV personality, though.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We spent a lot of time on quarterbacks. I don't know why we did that, but we'll move on to the next position group on offense, the running backs. That's coming up next on the Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals aren't going to be drafting the quarterback, but it obviously does affect at least the top of the draft. But this position group is probably one we might see the Cardinals do, and that would be running back. Now, is Bijan Robinson really the only running back that we'll probably see taken in round 1?
I would think so. And while I don't agree with this take, I wouldn't be shocked to see, fall is the wrong word, but I wouldn't be shocked if he wasn't taken in the top. I mean, he probably gets drafted in the first round, but I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't go till the start of day 2 either.
I wouldn't either, because if you look at him from an athletic standpoint, he's very good, and certainly the tape is great. The pedigree,
a local kid from here, Arizona,
right. But I mean, if you look at and Seth and I talked about this on our show, he's not Saquon Barkley. Athletically, he's not even Breece Hall, and Breece Hall went on day 2 last year. Now, Hall was great until he got hurt. So maybe, somebody's going to recognize that running backs do matter and take him earlier. I think Bijan's going to go in the first round. But I do think he's going to be the only running back that goes in the first round. And I think it's going to be later. I don't think Daniel Jeremiah has been ranking him in the top 5. I don't have a problem with that as a ranking. I ranked Jonathan Taylor in my top 5 a couple of years ago, and he didn't go till 41. But I think Bijan's kind of going to follow that same trail. And I don't think he's as good of a prospect as Taylor was, honestly.
Well, then after that, because Bijan's probably not on the table for the Cardinals, who are the running backs of note in this? Now, the name that came up both in the Senior Bowl and in the combine, at least on one of my NFL Wire sites, was Tyjae Spears out of Tulane. Not only did he thrill at the Senior Bowl, he was listed as one of the guys that helped himself at the combine.
Yeah, I'm interested on Spears because he came in at 5'9", just under 5'10", 201 pounds. He didn't run, which was surprising, but he jumped and he did really well. He 39-inch vert, 125-inch broad jump, which are really, really good numbers. Broad jump does matter. Vertical and broad jump do matter for running backs in the sense of it shows some lower body explosiveness. But he did no running drills. I don't think we have a real question about his quickness because we saw like his change of direction ability is elite. But you look at it, there's not a lot of guys, and this is something we've talked about, that fit Spears in the size category. And that's what the concern becomes when you look at, like running backs taken. You're talking about a guy that, maybe, at 201, right? You're talking like size wise, like Travis Homer. I don't know if you guys, I mean, Justin remembers Travis Homer, but he was a guy out of Miami, right, Justin?
Right. Yeah, he came out of Miami. He's been a kind of spot player for the Seahawks, special teams guy. The thing about Spears is one of the concerns was, well, for one, people wanted to see was he going to weigh over 200. He did that. But one of the other concerns was I guess he's had some knee issues. And was he going to be healthy? And the fact that he didn't run the 40 or the shuttles might raise some flags there. This is a guy coming from a group of 5 program. He caught a lot of fire at the Senior Bowl based off of Senior Bowl type of routes, which by that I mean those type of routes that take a couple of seconds, 2, 3, 4 seconds to develop that aren't realistic when you get it in a game situation. So he's got moves. I like this guy a lot. Certainly, Tulane had a great season. They played USC on a New Year's Day bowl, and Spears he's given some of their defensive players nightmares. But there are questions here about health and about like what he can really do against top competition. I think he helped himself in this All-Star Combine period, but I don't think there's necessarily any indication that he's going to go before day 3.
And the closest athletic comp for him that has been a really high pick was David Wilson. You remember the guy out of Virginia Tech that the Giants took at the end of the first round in 2012. And
another guy I think of too is like Elijah Mitchell coming out of Louisiana Lafayette.
Yeah, but he went in the 6th or 7th round.
Exactly. But he was about this size, and he actually ran a 40, and he ran it in the 4.3s, and he still went in the 6th round.
So, I mean, he had a great week. A couple names to know if the Cardinals – I would be really surprised if they went running back at 34, which is their second-round pick. But – guys that could fit. The first one's Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama, who, quietly, and I say that semi-facetiously, but quietly put up really good numbers, 5'9" and an 1/8, just under 200 pounds, 199 pounds. But he had a really good 40, and he's a guy that we've seen can be used as like a every down back, or a guy that can be used out of the backfield quite a bit. He's smaller, so I don't want this to be like, oh, this is the comp, but he is similar to what we saw with Kenneth Walker last year. He's just about 10 pounds lighter. That's the biggest question that you have on Gibbs. And it's been one of the funniest things about this entire week, right, is that kind of came out that these guys are either small and super athletic, or they're not athletic. Like there was no real in between with this group. But you do have a guy that's similar, like I said, in almost all testing numbers to Kenneth Walker, except he's coming about 10 pounds lighter. But here's the difference, I'll say, and obviously it's hyperbole and guess on our part, but I think it's semi-accurate too. I don't think a lot of these guys that weigh in at like 210 or 212 or 215 at running back play. I don't have a hard time seeing Gibbs playing at that 199. Would you, Justin?
No. But I still think that he comes from Alabama, and he transferred from Georgia Tech, by the way. But at every stop, he still had other backs contributing with him. Daniel Jeremiah was comparing Gibbs to Jamal Charles by the end of the weekend. So if you want to go with the high-end comp, there it is. Charles was about the same weight and 40 time, but a couple inches taller. But you can kind of imagine that because you have the receiving ability, and I think that makes more sense than the Alvin Kamara comps that we were getting before that, which I think were based more on the dreadlocks than the body type. So
I think it was the dreadlocks, but it was also the fact that
Kamara went to Alabama before he went to Tennessee.
He was such a great receiver.
Yeah. But I really like Gibbs. I think if there's a second running back taken in the first round, it might be Gibbs right at the tail end. But I think he's going to go early day 2, and I think it's a good spot for him. He did nothing but help himself, and this is another player kind of like Jameson Williams last year, where it's like you're not getting used in the ideal way, but you feel very confident in your skill set, so you go to Alabama and step right in to a starting role, and you turn to a star. So
I was going to ask a guy that comes up for me a couple of times in mock drafts, the kid out of UCLA, Zach Charbonnet.
I was actually just going to ask Justin to talk about him
now because he's been I know the one thing.
A couple of years.
Yeah, but granted, UCLA has him listed at 6'1", 220. He comes in at 6 foot 214, but still runs a 4.53. So he is on the bigger side. He's not as big as Keontae Ingram was last year, who was ginormous playing at USC. And then they got James Conner, who's another big back. Is he the type of player who could, because he caught the ball a little bit as well at UCLA? What do you think about him?
I'm a huge fan of Zach Charbonnet. Like, he was one when we did running backs early, in the middle of the season. That was one of my favorite running backs. In fact, he was my running back 3 behind Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. So Charbonnet comes in a little lighter than what he probably played at, because I think he played in the 220s, and I think he wanted to run a good 40. And 214, 4.53 is just fine, especially when you look at the jumps, 37-inch, 122-inch broad jump, which is 10 feet 2 inches. He's a younger guy too. He just turned 22 coming out of college, so he's played 4 years and still just a 22-year-old guy. I'm a big fan. He's a day 2 running back for me all the way, and if those first 2 guys are off the board, this is the perfect player, because he is a player who can be an every down starter or a tandem back. And so, you don't have to, you can, if you're devoid of running back talent, you can bring him in. He's going to carry the load for you. Certainly UCLA did that. But they spread the wealth with a bunch of running backs. And, but Charbonnet was a guy, he was averaging 6-7 yards a carry, even going back to his freshman year at Michigan. It was just that he fell out of favor for some reason. At Michigan, they had other talented backs there. I think he got banged up and transferred to UCLA, and he didn't miss a beat there.
A guy that he compares favorably to Jess is Rashad White, who's out of ASU, obviously,
Yes.
and went third round. So like Jace kind of talking about, like he, you're going to get a guy that's probably going to go, I would say top 90 ish. And nobody's going to bat an eye because he's a guy that, can do it all. He's shown durability. He's got good size, good athleticism, good testing.
Really good pass catcher too.
Yeah, and so like I said, similar to White, so a guy that can be a true 3-down back.
I did not realize that X-Valide didn't get to the
the
combine.
Yeah, that was actually one of the bigger snubs. Was is it Xavian or Xavian?
Yeah,
I don't know. Like it's spelt like Zaziv. It's X. It's X Valley. Okay.
And he didn't make it. He's a little overaged prospect. He'll be 24 in July, and also came in. I think he was in the NFLPA Bowl, but he's kind of taller guy at 5'11 plus, but 199.
Super productive. He was
very productive. But he came out of a group of 5 school and then only 1 year in the Power 5. So I think he just got caught up in a numbers game.
A couple like day 3 guys that stood out. The one that was kind of the big mover, literally, was Deneric Prince out of Tulsa. He came in at 6 foot, 216 pounds, and then ran a 4.41 40. So you're like, oh, this guy can move. Good solid jump numbers. Obviously when you're running that fast, you're going to be hard to take down anyways. Jay, I was going to ask you about this, like maybe not a guy that is looked at overly as like a really good player, but he kind of reminds me of Tashard Choice when he was coming out of Georgia Tech, right? Like 5'11, 215, ran a 4.48, and had a really good career. I mean, was in the league forever.
Yeah, one of the guys he reminded me of just from a stylistic standpoint and also from production standpoint was Chris Carson coming out of Oklahoma State. And what you have with Deneric Prince is a faster 40, but otherwise the numbers measure up pretty well. And Carson, similar to Prince, never had like that full season of like bell cow production, but it was because of being banged up or whatnot. And we saw Carson go on day 3 and become a really productive player, albeit for a short time. That's the type of player. Tashard Choice was kind of like that too, but that's the type of player that I see here with Prince. He's going to go on day 3, and he could end up being a starting running back for a couple of years in the league.
And then the last guy would be Evan Hull out of Northwestern.
A real try-hard.
Yeah. He's a guy, 5'10 and an eighth, 210 pounds. But he ran a 4.47, had a good vertical and broad jump. He had a good 3-cone. The 20-yard shuttle concerns me. And it does kind of show up in that kind of, he's a one cut and go guy, right? Like he's not a shifty guy. He's more of a downhill runner.
Yeah, to me, his best value is as a receiver. He had a game early this year where I believe he got 14 passes. That's kind of his game. He's, to me, a third down back. And like I said, it was funny watching the combine. Every rep that he took in the field drills, he took all the way to the end zone. You could tell Rich Eisen was kind of getting kind of rolling his eyes about it, but I don't know. His Northwestern coaches probably liked it, but the combine coaches were probably kind of like, dude, just get back in line. Like,
his high end comp for me, and I want this to be understood that I'm not saying he should be drafted in the similar range, but like his playing style, and you mentioned it, the fact that he's a great receiver out of the backfield, or that's his best attribute. It reminds me of Joseph Adai, right? With the Colts. Now, obviously, the Colts took a die in the first round, and we're talking about a hole on day 3. But like you look at a die, he had 40 receptions, 41 receptions, and then 51 receptions 3 out of the first 4 years that he was in the league. Like he was never a lead back. He was a guy that like he made 1 Pro Bowl. He was obviously it was a not a great pick to take him in the first round, but he also was the final piece of the puzzle to help get Indy to win a Super Bowl. So it's like, can you really complain about it that much? But
Paul's
like,
going to end up with the Chiefs or the 49ers or the Eagles too, like
right.
in the 7th round and be in, rush for 500 yards. And everyone's going to be like, wow, we got to find the next Evan Hall. It's like Pacheco last year.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the wide receiver position. A much different group this year than it was last year. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, best of our Cardinals talk on the web. We talk about the receivers now. Last year was a special receiver class. This year, not so much. Who are the names to know?
It's special for us, Jess, because basically what this guarantees is that if the Cardinals do move on for DeAndre Hopkins, they could probably squeeze a first-round pick out of a team, because this was one of the more disappointing groups I can remember, just as far as like a group in a really long time. Like the guys that impressed are clear, like day 2 guys at best, but a lot of them are day 3 guys.
And of course, there will be players that come out of this draft that will be productive players, but not because of the type of prospect they were.
Right. And, you look at it, and it started with like, the guy out of Nebraska who Justin and I have talked about since he transferred there, Trey Palmer. He was 6 foot 190, and we call that jag size, right? Like those are guys.
Every receiver's that size,
right? Just a guy, like jag, just a guy.
And so you look at it, and then you go, okay, well, what's his trait? Well, he ran a 4.33, so he's super fast. He had elite production his senior season.
He actually broke Nebraska's single season receiving and receiving yards records in basically his only season there. So you've got a guy with jag size, but exceptional production. And like Seth said, he runs a 4.33.
So, I mean, his best comp that I could come up with, and again, some like these high-end comps end up being like first-round picks, but like Lee Evans, remember when he came out of Wisconsin and then went to Buffalo and had a nice career? He was, 5'11", 197, and was a little bit slower at a 4.39. But that was back in 2004 when going sub 4.4 was actually still really impressive, right, Jay?
Yeah, and I think the thing with Lee Evans too is you have some explosive jumps from him that we don't have from Trey Palmer. We just got that 40. So I'll give you a couple names too. Mike Wallace went in the 3rd round coming out of Ole Miss and had a great career. But again, he had some more explosive jumps. We don't know exactly what Trey Palmer's jumps are like. I'll give you Kenny Stills out of Oklahoma. Had that 40 time, didn't really test otherwise. Kenny Stills is my favorite comp for Trey Palmer. Stills went 5th round, had some really productive time in the NFL, and I think Trey Palmer's going to follow that trajectory.
The guys that were supposed to be the top guys, I think we can start with Jackson Smith and Jigba. He didn't run the 40, but he did the short shuttle and the 3-cone drills and put up what can only be described as like elite numbers, like not good numbers, kind of borderline all-time level numbers.
He had the best of both the short shuttle and 3-cone of any players that participated in the combine, period. And coming off an injury too.
And so he was a guy, that you look at that really kind of impressed me. It's hard to find comps because his jumps were average, which is fine when you're talking about he had a above average broad jump, a slightly below average vertical, but he had like literally elite level 3-cone and short shuttle, like where you rarely see those numbers. Do you think we're going to get a 40 on him at all, Jay?
I don't think so, because he participated in basically all the testing except for the 40. I mean, we don't really care too much about receiver bench press, but then he also did the field drills and he drew rave reviews. So he really stands nothing to gain from running a 40 at this point. He's 6'1", 196 pounds. So you look at the testing overall, 6.57 3-cone is so outstanding. It's better than Cooper Kupp, who had a fantastic 3-cone. The 3.93 short shuttle, you and I knew, Seth, that he was going to run a very quick shuttle. He did, I think, 3.91 at the opening in high school at about 199 pounds, so about the same weight. What you come up with is, do you think he's only a slot? If you think he's only a slot, the testing comes out and the weight comes out like Julian Edelman, although Smith-Njigba is about 3 inches taller.
A comp I came up with for him, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this. Greg Jennings.
That's interesting. I think Jennings was quite a bit bigger, wasn't he?
No, he came in at 6'1", 198.
Oh, wow. Because he just seemed bigger, just looking at him play, right?
Yeah.
And everyone knows that Madden clip where, Greg Jennings on Madden has a broken leg and runs like 90 yards for a touchdown. But another name I was going to bring up is Amari Cooper, because Cooper was about 12, 13 pounds heavier, but about the same height, and ran similar cone and shuttle. But I think we would probably agree that Cooper was about 1/10 of a second faster than what we would expect Smith-Njigba to run the 40. So if you think JSN can play outside, Amari Cooper might be the comp. If you think he's strictly slot, Julian Edelman might be the comp. But now you've brought in Greg Jennings, and if you pair him with the right quarterback, he can be a star.
A couple of guys that I don't want to say disappointed, but underwhelmed. Jalen Hyatt, we talked about Jag size. That was him. We were expecting, based on the fact that he was a world-class sprinter, that he was going to give us a little more. 6 foot, sub 180 pounds. Those are really
that's
small.
Really lean.
Yeah.
And when he does, he ran a 4.4, but
which is great. Yeah, but it's not elite anymore. Right. I mean, that's closer to Paul.
It's funny
Richardson.
to say that, right?
Right. Those are numbers like Paul Richardson, like who went in the second round but just never panned out, and a lot of it was due to injuries and inability to stay on the field.
One of the guys you and I compared to on our show was Will Fuller, and Fuller ran 4.31, 4.32. But I still think they're comparable to the type of routes where they won, which was the slant and the deep ball, right? The go and the slant. And I'm not out on Hyatt. But to me, he was never the receiver 1. He was more like the receiver 4 or 5 in this class.
And then
and that's how I felt about Fuller, by the way.
Yeah, and Jordan Addison kind of, that was, I don't want to say bad, but that was one of the most harmful combine.
No, but I disagree, man. It's if Devontae Smith would have tested.
You think Smith would have been a 4.5 guy?
Yeah. That's why he didn't run. And I think he would have been lighter than 173 too. And Addison is going to be a good litmus test, because he 5'11", 173 pounds, the shorter arms, under 31. But look, this guy won a Biletnikoff Award as a sophomore with Kenny Pickett as his quarterback. They both had great years that year. But then he went to the Pac-12 with Lincoln Riley, with Caleb Williams. And when he was healthy, he was still putting up numbers. So this is that sneaky one. People are going to be down on him. I don't agree with that. I think he's still a star. Is he a first round pick? Traditionally, maybe not. But if you run the numbers, I'll give you a name. I'll give you guys a name. Titus Young, coming out of Boise State, right? That sounds bad because we know Titus Young flamed out, but it wasn't because of on the field stuff. It was because of off the field stuff. He was actually going to be a very good player. Had a great rookie year. And then another name that comes up, if you look at Jordan Addison's numbers, it's Harry Douglas, who played for the Falcons. So those don't seem like great names, but if that's your floor, which I think is the case, you're still looking at a late first round or early second round pick in this class.
A late day 2, early day 3 name, A.T. Perry, had a nice combine. Came in just a shade under 6'4", which is always nice to see when those guys are listed at 6'4" and then they come in at 6'3 and 5/8 instead of 6'2 and a half. Justin and I appreciate that because that means we can take your measurements for real when we go look at your website, because most of the time these guys come in like an inch and a half shorter than what they are listed at.
They have they list their height based on when they're wearing cleats.
Yeah. So 6'3 and 5'8".
6'5" then.
Yeah, right. 198 pounds, but he went 4.47 at 6'4", 200 pounds.
He's had a great post-draft season. I mean,
right.
He was at was it the Shrine Bowl?
He was at the Shrine.
Performed very well. Measured right about the same. 4.47 is a great time for him. The knock on Perry is that he's a little bit older than some of these guys, but that's going to be the trend for the next year or two. So he'll be 24, but not till late October. So not super old.
Let me throw a comp for this is probably high end, but people are going to think it's not. But what about, he reminds me of Devontae Parker coming out.
That's a super high end comp. He was a first round pick.
Right. But I'm not expecting him, but I'm saying like he could have a similar type career where you're talking about a guy that goes, averages about 50 and 600 a year. Like he's a,
yeah, that'd be, I mean, I like Perry a lot. I would start looking at him around 4th round.
Yeah. And
because this is even though people are crapping on this receiver class, there are still a lot of really good receivers in this class and a lot of really fast ones. And so Perry at his age, coming out of Wake, I would start looking at him around 4th round.
The one guy that most people had never heard of, and then he kind of blew everything up, was Bryce Ford Wheaton. 6'3 and a half, 221 pounds, and then he ran a 4.38 with a 41-inch vertical. So literally like a matchup jump ball nightmare.
He gets my annual Stephen Hill comp.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think like best case scenario would be like a Martavis Bryant, right?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I picked Stephen Hill is because he's that tall, that heavy, runs in the 4.3s, and drops a lot of passes.
Oh, geez.
And I'll tell you, I like him. I really do. I mean, but if you watch him on tape, like that's a fact. Like the ball just goes right through his hands sometimes. So in the same game, you'll see him make a dynamic play. He's really good with the back shoulder throw. Seth and I talked about him extensively on Draft Breakdown podcast on iTunes, but you'll see some balls just go right through his hands. And one of them turned into a game-winning pick 6. It's hard to ignore.
Oh, no.
Any other receivers you're curious about?
No.
Just
We'll just keep cranking it out.
All right. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to the tight end group, which Daniel Jeremiah said 4 could go in the first round. That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, best our Cardinals talk on the web. Watching the combine. I don't normally watch the combine, but on Sunday afternoon, I actually turned on the combine and was watching some of it. And then the tight ends were doing their work and saw some really good stuff. And Daniel Jeremiah said 3, maybe 4 would go in the first round. Okay, I get Michael Mayer. I get Dalton Kincaid. Maybe Darnell Washington with the workouts that he put up. 4 tight ends in the first round. Is this a possibility?
It's a possibility, but I no, I don't think so. I mean,
let's start. We can start with Mayer. I think there's going to start being, you got your annual Stephen Hill. I'm going to start giving out my annual. Who was the Cowboys tight end forever? I can't remember his name now.
Jason Witten?
Yeah. I'm going to start giving out my annual Jason Witten award because Mayer, not to the level of like a Bijan, but like he just kind of does everything fine, right? Like,
is that the award for guy who doesn't look like a great player, but actually is?
Right. Well, I mean, Mayer's been like, he's been a highly touted guy since his freshman year, right?
Well, yeah, he was. I mean, and people are acting like he sucked this weekend, and he was 6'4.5", almost 250, ran a 4.7, 32.5-inch vert. Like
but
he didn't blow anyone away, but all of those are totally normal.
But he has every skill set, right? So he tests fine. He's got the right build. And if you look at his game, there's no flaws.
Great
it's
blocker.
Just there's nothing special. And I guess his special trait is that he does everything pretty well.
Yeah, right, he didn't run a 4.49 after not catching any passes this year.
Right. and so, you've got that. I think the guy that kind of stole the show from everybody, including Darnell Washington, was Zach Kuntz, right?
Right, and nobody's talking about him in the first round. In fact, Seth, you and I talked about him as possibly emerging as like a day 3 tight end because Zach Kuntz was coming out of Old Dominion. He missed a good bit of this year with injury, but he showed up. And at 6'7", 255, he ran a 4.55 with a 40-inch vertical and a 6.87 3-cone and a 4.12 short shuttle. I mean, nobody is talking about him even as a day 2 guy. So I don't know why are we going to force the issue? And also, why poo-poo a guy like Michael Mayer because his testing wasn't ideal when it's just you look at T.J. Hawkinson. He ran a 4.7 as well. I mean, yes, he had a better vertical jump than Michael Mayer, but it's not like he was a burner. And nobody had a problem at the time with him going in the top 10. So Kuntz, this guy, he's a little bit older. He's again, he was a Penn State transfer, ends up at Old Dominion. He's going to be 24 in June. Didn't have the production this year because of the injuries, but a couple of years ago he had 71 catches. So this guy, really good opportunity to get a super athletic player on day 3 of this draft. Jelani Woods is the player that I thought of when I looked at his athleticism. And Kuntz, when people draft Kuntz, they're going to think about what Jelani Woods did. I think he was a 3rd-round pick and ended up the season with over 20 catches, over 400 yards, and 3 touchdowns for the Colts. And he barely played the first half of the year. So that's the kind of player I think Kuntz can be.
Let me throw another let me throw another name at you, Justin, that will bring you back, but Kuntz kind of reminds me and tested similarly to Jordan Cameron, your former tight end.
Okay, yeah. There was always a joke that they thought they were taking Cameron Jordan, the Saints defensive end, and they actually took Jordan Cameron. But yeah, the former USC tight end who had a really good year. I think he was a basketball player turned tight end. But yeah, I mean, if you can get a guy like that on day 3, you're winning all the way.
I was going to ask you, Seth, in terms of Cardinals, since they took Trey McBride last year and they've got Zach Ertz, at what point do we need to look at tight end as would they go tight end even as high as day 2, or would it have to be a scenario where someone they absolutely loved happened to fall in their lap?
It would just depend on what they are expecting from Ertz in terms of a return. If not, then you could see a guy like maybe Sam Laporta with that 3rd round pick, the Iowa tight end, who had a great combine. And we know those Iowa guys, they're first known for their blocking, and then they do a good job everywhere else. Laporta came in at 6'3", 245, ran well, jumped well, had good short shuttles. And, we know what you get from Iowa tight ends from a blocking standpoint. Like, those are never a negative on those guys. He's a guy, we mentioned Kuntz on maybe early day 3, maybe with that comp pick at, I think it's like 91, might sound a little early. I don't know what to make of Luke Musgrave, because I just don't. We've talked about him. He's older and he's been injured a lot. And that's always my concern, but he's got a similar skill set to like Dallas Goedert, who you wonder, obviously the Philly coaches aren't offensive guys, but they'll still have some say in that. And, could he be a similar weapon? But the nice thing is there's a lot of depth in this tight end class if they want to go on, late day 2, early day 3, if they feel like they need to. All those guys we mentioned obviously kind of fit. And then you can throw in like a Tucker Kraft out of South Dakota State, who replaced Goedert and now is getting, similar, if not slightly less buzz than him.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, special of Cardinals Talk on the Web, we will wrap up this edition of the show talking about the offensive line. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, special of Cardinals Talk on the Web. The last group to talk about on offense is the offensive line. Cardinals need help on the offensive line. Clearly, they have 4 starters that aren't expected to be back. Calvin Beecham's a free agent right tackle. Will Hernandez, free agent right guard. Rodney Hudson expected to retire. Justin Pugh, free agent. So all they have left is DJ Humphries coming off a back injury. Josh Jones, not sure where he's going to play. Offensive line's a big deal. Who are the guys to know? And did you guys already have have you guys had your Sully show yet?
No, not yet. That'll be in a couple weeks.
Let's go. Okay, so that's a plug for the show. If you're listening, if you want to talk offensive line, you want to hear offensive line talk, make sure you listen to the show when Justin and Seth have Sully on.
Yeah, it's always the best show of the year because it's what Justin and I know the least about, and then Sully comes in and drops names, and then they all end up being good starters in the NFL. So
exactly. I mean, just in recent years, we've heard him drop guys like Wyatt Teller, Trey Smith, like just guys that you wouldn't normally think of that become late round or mid round picks that end up being really good. So definitely, that's one of our most popular shows every single year.
This offensive line class is tough because you've got great testers who either have flaws or questions. Then you have the guys that looked the part that decided that they weren't going to test right now. And by that, I mean the Ohio State guys. And because, they're going to wait until.
Hey, they did test. They did great.
And you start
Luke
with
Whippler was one of the top testers. Paris Johnson had like 110-inch broad jump, and DeJuan Jones ran 5.35 at 375 pounds.
Yeah,
what do you want from these guys, Seth?
So big. That's giant. Yeah. Oh, gosh.
And I mean that seems like a sucky time, 5.35. But when the guy weighs
374 pounds.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
I mean, you don't want that guy bearing down on you. He's a perfect right tackle.
So Peter Skoronski, the guy, there's Paris Johnson, Peter Skoronski. So those are the names I'm hearing near the top of the draft. How are they? Is Paris Johnson a guy that's expected to be, hey, you're going to get good play? Skoronski, obviously, it's not like at Northwestern. That's definitely a big time. It's not it's a small time program of the big time programs, obviously, in the Big Ten.
I love Skoronski. He's actually, I live in Park Ridge, Illinois. He's actually from this neighborhood. He went to high school here. So I have an affinity for him. But he's a guard, and he's being projected by a lot of mock drafters as the top offensive tackle. To me, he's not an offensive tackle. He's going to be a really good guard. Seth has talked about him and Zach Martin in the same breath, and and that's kind of what I expect. Like, think Zach Martin, think Joel Bitonio, guys that played tackle in college, but are going to move inside because they're not super tall. They don't have long arms, and they're athletic, but they're athletic in a guard type of way. That's Skoronski to me. Paris Johnson is 6'5" with 36-inch arms and runs. He didn't run at the combine, but we know from his high school testing they can run about a 5.05 40, and we know that because his weight hasn't changed that much. A lot of these guys don't test at the combine because their numbers are already out there, and that's what people don't understand. Then those testing numbers are out there. If their weight hasn't changed a lot, if their body type hasn't changed, they don't really have anything to prove with this testing. So Paris Johnson came out. He a 9-foot 2-inch broad jump for a guy that weighs over 300 pounds is really impressive. And then he excelled in his on-field workouts. So I think if you're looking for an offensive tackle, Paris Johnson, to me, is the best one in the class. Peter Skoronski is maybe the best guard in the class, or at least one of the best guards in the class.
What about a guy like Darnell Wright? Where does he land in everything?
Absolutely a first-round pick to me. He's a former 5-star. He's 6'5", 330 pounds, and he ran a 5.01 40. What we don't know is his shuttle times, and those shuttle times can kind of tell you what you're looking at as far as left tackle versus right tackle or tackle versus guard. And admittedly, Paris Johnson didn't have the shuttle times either. But the thing is, if you just look at him on tape, you can tell he's quicker. But Wright is, to me, a starting right tackle from day one. And at worst, he's not super, super tall. He's 6'5". If you have to, you can kick him inside to guard, and he's a mauler. He's very good. I really like him. I think he's going to go late first round.
Yeah, he compares pretty favorably to like Roger Saffold, who has had a really good career, and like Justin said, he's been used at right tackle and at the guard positions. He's a guy that just, I think he'd be a great fit at 34 if he was there. I just don't see, like Justin said, like Wright getting out of the first round because there's so few guys that have what he has, which is elite size, very good athleticism. He jumped 114 inches on the broad jump, which is the 95th percentile. You got to remember, we're talking about a 333-pound man.
And to put that in other terms, 9 feet 6 inches for a guy with 333 pounds. And he's also not going to be 22 years old till August.
And he's got something that Justin and I like. He's got like, what, I think 40 plus starts.
Yeah, Wright is a 4-year starter, essentially. So I love 3- and 4-year starters along offensive line because one of the things that people that know O-line talk about is cohesion. And so you want guys that have built that, built that camaraderie among their peers. And that's why one of the things where we talked about DeJuan Jones, Paris Johnson, both of those guys only started for basically 2 years on Ohio State's line. It's not a knock on them, but they lack the experience of a guy like Wright. So you're going to have to take Paris Johnson early in the top 15. But you could, if you want to, wait until later in the first round to get Darnell Wright and get a 4-year starter.
What are Justin, rather, your athletic red flags? I know we ran across that a few years ago, but in terms of offensive linemen, what are your athletic red flags, and does that apply to anyone that we saw in the combine this year?
Yeah, always with offensive line, my athletic red flags are going to be if you are over 8 seconds in the 3-cone and over 5 seconds in the short shuttle. It's not a death knell, but at the same time, you really just want to back off from those players. And maybe guys are getting wise to that, and just not doing it. Yeah. So, but you have a couple this year, and I'll give you a couple names. And I'm going to try and pronounce this one correctly, but Washington guard Henry Bainavlu. Yeah. He ran a 5.540, but he had an 8.34 second 3-cone. Like, he really, he actually had above average jumps. But unless you're asking him to completely just block straightforward downhill, like, he's not going to be a guy that's going to be able to pull for you. He won't get there in time. He's just simply not going to be able to do it. A current one, if you look at offensive tackle Connor Galvin from Baylor, he's 6'7" and 293. So already, he's very tall, but also very lean. And then he has 32-inch arms, which, for a tall guy, not a huge red flag. But then you look at his 5.48, 8-second 3-cone, and then a 4.92 short shuttle. So you don't have any agility with this guy. You don't have any straight line speed. He actually looks and tests like a straight up basketball player, but not like a scorer, a shot blocker. Like, he can jump, he's tall, but he can't move, and I think that's problematic. I think Connor Galvin's probably kind of tested himself out of consideration if you're asking me to draft. Too tall and skinny. His arms are too short. He can't run. He can't move laterally. All I can do is jump, and that's not really going to do anything for me on the offensive line. I don't know where to put him. He's too tall for guard. He's too tall and thin for guard. He's not quick enough footed for right tackle or left tackle. So I just don't know what to do with him.
Couple of names of note. He won a guard, Steve Avila at TCU. I've seen him connect to the Cardinals in mock drafts, just where they fall. And then obviously the center position is going to be super important for the Cardinals. They tried to draft 2 different centers last year. They would have gotten Linderbaum had they not traded for Hollywood. They wanted Cam Jurgens. He got swiped away in the second round by the Eagles. Rodney Hudson's out the door. Who are the centers worth looking at? I know John Michael Schmitz is getting the attention. Is there anyone else center-wise and guard-wise that the Cardinals should be looking at?
Yeah, you mentioned John Michael Schmitz. He's a guy that tested where he needed to be. Wasn't elite by any means, but like, you get a John Sullivan comp from him. So Sullivan was a decade plus starter for the Minnesota Vikings, in the NFL. So he was, that's a good comp. Luke Whippler out of Ohio State had a really good numbers. I think the biggest knock on him is he came in at 303, which is, but
it's
probably
fine. It's fine
it's
for
fine.
A center. I mean,
I think the biggest
you can
knock
go
is
small
probably
at center,
right.
But like, every athletic test that he ran was either above average or like his 3-cone was just average. But he had the best short shuttle of any center, and a 30+ inch vert. I mean, Whippler's super young. He's only going to be 21 in May.
And he's a guy that's to that point is a center only. Like, three, like he said,
oh yeah, for sure.
303, 31 and 5/8 inch arms. So
yeah,
6'3".
He's made to play center.
Right. So 6'3" with baby arms. So he's got to play center, but you've got good comps on him. A guy that the Cardinals had to deal with.
And he's a redshirt sophomore. He started both years.
And so he's got some really good comps, like Chris Spencer. I don't know if you remember him. Yes, but he was with the Seahawks forever. And I think started 6 years in Seattle, started for the Bears, started for the Titans. So a guy that was in, and he was a first round pick. Holy cow, I didn't realize that. And
so you're saying Luke Whippler is a first round pick. Perfect.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the center position's good. There are questions on a couple of these guys at guard that you have to watch out for too. Like we talked about it a little bit. Osiris Torrance, he came in at 6'5", 330, and he got a 4.81 short shuttle, but his explosive testing numbers were really, and I get it.
He's a pure road grader.
Right. Like you're drafting him and
you cannot pull with this guy. Yeah, it's pure downhill with him.
So, there's a lot of question marks, but I think the overall consensus is there's, in those first 91 picks, which the Cardinals have 4 of as of right now, there's a really good chance to add 2 or 1 or 2 starters on the offensive line, whether it be interior or if they want to go with a right tackle.
And if you're looking for guard too, the Cardinals are going to have choices on day 3 because you got John Gaines II from UCLA, who was one of the best testers of any offensive lineman, a 3-year starter guy who's played at guard, center, and tackle. He's probably going to still be there on day 3. You got Cody Mock out of North Dakota State. Some people are listing him at tackle. I think he's going to be a guard long term. And another good tester, a guy who famously has no 2 front teeth, but also a guy who's already 23 years old, or I guess 24 years old. So I think he might drop, but although we saw the Patriots take Cole Strange at 24 out of the FCS in the first round last year. But Braden Daniels from Utah, out your guys' way. I think Daniel Jeremiah was still touting him as a tackle, but he's 6'4", 294. Very average size across the board, but very high-end athleticism. And I think even Jeremiah, who said give him a shot at tackle, said his best shot's at guard. And that, to me, he's a guy who's going to help day 3.
Anybody else of note among the linemen, either rising or falling in terms of the combine?
No, I think Blake Freeland's a name to remember from BYU, but he's going to have to put on some weight. He was, he's 6'8", 302, but he had record-setting jump numbers and moved well in the 3-cone and short shuttle. But 302 was really light. They not feed those guys when they go on their mission, Jess? Come on, man.
Depends on where they go. Depends on where they go.
But I mean, he's a guy, we just don't see guys that size. I mean, we really don't see guys that are 6'8" and barely crack 300 pounds. It's a really, usually if they are, you're talking like Eric Armstead, right?
Yeah. And at that size, you almost say, hey, trim down, play tight end.
Right, exactly.
All right, with that wraps up the offensive edition of the Combine Show of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We've wrapped up the talk of the offensive prospects. On our next show, we will go over the defense. We have big thanks to Justin Higdon as always. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We'll be back again in a couple of days with the defensive prospects. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.